Hey everybody, this is Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer, the YouTube channel. My name is Jason Youngblood, and I'm the author of the book, The Gospel of Napoleon Hill, Scholar or Scammer. And this YouTube channel is just a visual to some of the content in the book, as far as the claims that Napoleon Hill was a fraud or a scammer by certain YouTube channel authors, and then also authors of different blog posts on websites. Going through some of the details of his biography that were controversial, such as he was arrested several times, he was sued several times. And what I found was in my research to find out whether or not Napoleon Hill was, whether he was a scammer or whether he was legitimate, is that the claims that the critics make are actually unfinished. So they would, for instance, on one of the claims, if they were to say he was arrested or that he was sued, they would just say the fact that he was sued. They wouldn't tell you the end result of the lawsuit on whether he was exonerated or not. So I believe a lot of these claims, if not all of them, stop short of telling you the finished story of what actually happened to let you know whether or not he was actually a scammer or not. So I did the historical research by digging through microfilm and newspaper articles and historical documents in history while he was alive that were recorded at the time to know whether or not anybody ever said he didn't know Andrew Carnegie, he didn't know Woodrow Wilson, he didn't know President Franklin Roosevelt, or hey, he was a crook, he was a swindler, he was a scammer and a fraud because he was arrested and he was found guilty. Actually, I found the opposite to be true, is that while he may have been arrested and while he may have been sued, he was exonerated in every case. And so we've been going through this article. The main article where most of the critics get their content from is The Untold Story of Napoleon Hill, the greatest self-help scammer of all time, written by Matt Novak. And we've been going through each episode as one of the claims, addressing each claim at a time. So I'll share my screen with you and just talk about the next claim. We talked about it in episode 9, and this is episode 10 that we're on right now. But we talked about his marriages, and it was just a little choppy. I was reading, from my screen, but my screen was kind of blocked by the Zoom pop-up, so I really couldn't read fluently. So I just wanted to reread some of the things that I addressed in episode 9. That way you could have a better understanding of it by me reading the details more fluently. And so the claim here in the Untold Story of Napoleon Hill, the greatest self-help scammer of all time, Matt Novak just says officially Napoleon Hill supporters are probably aware of 2 or 3 marriages. In fact, he was married at least 5 times. Just leaving doubt that maybe he was married more than 5 times. And, what people think about people who are married several times is that they don't have any character or integrity because they're not good spouses. But he was, in fact, married not 5 times even, but he was married 4 times. So we'll find out more about that here later. This would perhaps not be worth mentioning except for the circumstances surrounding his first 2 marriages, the two that are largely missing from the official stories of Hill. And by the way, these 2 stories are not largely missing from the stories of Hill. They're actually in his memoirs, where he addresses his first 2 marriages. Um, he's counting the first 2 marriages as 2 separate ones when they're actually probably one and the same person. And then he goes on to say Hill's first marriage occurred when he was just 15 and had gotten a girl pregnant. According to the official Hill biography, which is the only known record of this marriage, the young girl's father angrily demanded that the two be married, but not long after the wedding, Napoleon's bride confessed that he had not fathered her child. He goes on to say the marriage was annulled, though it's unclear why this young girl would claim that the 15-year-old Napoleon was the father if this wasn't the case. So here's the claim is that he married a young girl at just 15 years old when he was 15 because he had gotten her pregnant, and the father angrily confronted the Hill family and forced Napoleon to marry her. And then after the wedding, the young bride confessed that he was not the father of the child in the first place. So I'll stop sharing my screen because, there's a lot to unpack here. Well, and the main question that we're asking ourselves is, who is this 15-year-old girl? What is her name? Because if we're going to count this as one of the 5 marriages, we need to know who this person actually is. And Napoleon Hill actually addresses this in his memoirs by giving us a time frame that he was married to this person. So in his memoirs, called Mastermind, that was released, I believe, in 2021, he actually says, "My first wife I married." He says at 16 years old, but he gives you the time frame of when he was working for General Rufus Ayres. So we'll find out here as I go on what year he was working for General Rufus Ayres and who he was married to, because it is the same person that he was married to at that time of who this 15-year-old girl is. So I'll share my screen and we'll first read from A Lifetime of Riches, which is his biography, not his autobiography, not the words that he wrote. But this autobiography came out, or this biography came out in 1995 and was published by the Napoleon Hill Foundation. So it just says here, not long after the moonshining incident. He had written a story when he was 13 years old for one of the newspapers he was a reporter for, and made up a story about one of his neighbors moonshining, and they got in trouble for it and confronted the Hill family about them getting in trouble for moonshining when they felt like they hadn't actually done that. So, not long after the moonshining incident, a raging father came to the Hills' home claiming Napoleon had gotten his daughter pregnant. Napoleon's protestations were not nearly convincing enough to overcome the accusations of the girl or the murderous intent of her father. With head spinning suddenness, Napoleon found himself married and an expected father at the age of 15. And so I'll stop sharing this and go to his memoirs to where Napoleon Hill addresses this himself in his own words. And so this is his book called Mastermind. It's his memoirs, and his memoirs are composed of two different biographies that he was working on before he passed in 1970. One was called The Hand of Destiny, and the other one was called The Wheel of Fortune. And what the Napoleon Hill Foundation did, because they were both unfinished, is just kind of compile the two accounts together into one memoir. All right, and this was released, I believe, in 2022 under the title Mastermind. And so Napoleon, in his own words, says, "My first marriage was doomed to failure before it began, owing to many causes which should have been obvious to both the woman I married and myself. In the first place, I was only 16." So remember the account in Lifetime of Riches and the claim of Matt Novak in his article is that he was 15. Here, Napoleon Hill says he's 16. So we know he's talking about the same time frame. But the two ages are just different. All right. So I was 16 and she was 10 years my senior, meaning that she was 26. So that's a big age gap. So we'll find out on whether or not Napoleon Hill was correct in this or if he's just gravely mistaken because he's writing this from memory and not sure what age he was or what age she was. All right. That alone was a handicap of almost insurmountable proportions, but there was another and still greater difficulty. The woman I married was motivated to marry me, despite the great differences in our ages, to escape unpleasant disharmonies with certain members of her own family. So, in other words, she was trying to escape a bad relationship with somebody in her household. Maybe it was a parent, probably. And so she married Napoleon Hill to get out of the house so that she could kind of give herself some breathing room from being in a bad household. So he goes on to write, in other words, she married trouble in order to run away from trouble. So he's calling himself trouble and saying she was trying to run away from trouble in her house from her parents or her caregivers, and she married trouble to run away from other trouble. All right, a very common practice among both men and women, but one that usually leads to failure in marriage. There was still a third reason why the marriage did not succeed, and it was so important it perhaps should have headed the list of the three causes of failure. I can best describe this third cause of failure as lack of common purpose in life between my wife and myself. So you may clearly understand just what I mean. I should perhaps inform you that from the day my stepmother dropped her artificial teeth and broke the plate, which resulted in her transforming my father from a country farmer into a successful professional man, I had become obsessed with the idea that I could equal or surpass his achievements in my own field of endeavor. And very frankly, I was out to accomplish this. So he's giving you some background story as to why him and his first wife divorced because he wanted to be as successful as his dad was because his stepmother had took him from being just a farmer to actually encourage him to being a dentist from an incident to where she dropped her teeth and broke them and then bought him the equipment to fix her teeth. So Napoleon goes on. Now he's giving you the time frame of when he was married to this woman at 16 years old, or what the lifetime of riches says is 15 years old. Very shortly after my forced marriage, as previous related, I came to the attention of General Rufus A. Ayres. All right. He was then one of Virginia's most distinguished and successful lawyers with industrial and banking interest on the side. General Ayres appointed me as his chief secretary. In less than a year later, I had been appointed general manager of one of his coal mines. All right. And then later on, he says down here, shortly after I took over the general manager's job, my wife and I were horseback riding in the mountains one Sunday morning. We were riding two very fine, spirited horses belonging to the company of General Ayres. We dismounted at an old abandoned farm to give our horses a chance to rest and to graze. My wife stood at the head of her mount, feeding him with a lump of sugar and stroking his neck affectionately, indicating her admiration for the horse. I watched her for a few minutes, admire her for admiring the horse. Then I asked if she would like to own the horse. All right. He just makes a side note that I had made up my mind to buy him from the company and present him to her. Now, the main thing that I want to focus on, I don't want to go into many of the details of the story. You can read it for yourself and purchase the memoirs Mastermind from the Napoleon Hill Foundation. Is that this wife, he identifies her as the same wife that Lifetime of Riches says was the 15-year-old girl. He just says the same wife that he married when he was 15 years old, because he says he's 16. All right. But it also gives you the time frame that he was married to this first wife. So the time frame is when he worked for General Rufus Ayres, because he says two different time frames here. So one is very shortly after my first marriage. So very shortly after my first marriage, I came to the attention of General Rufus A. Ayres. When did he come to the attention of General Rufus A. Ayres? In 1902. Now, that doesn't mean he married her in 1901 or in 1902, because he did marry somebody in 1903. He's telling you that around the time that I worked for General Ayres, I was married to my first wife. And then down here, he actually clarifies it even further by saying, shortly after I took over the general manager's job, my wife, the same first wife, all right, that he supposedly married at 16 years old, they were horseback riding. So now the question becomes is, when did he take over the general manager's job, all right, of the coal mine? So if we go in the same book to page 26, he will tell you when he got his first job as the general manager of one of Rufus Ayres' coal mine. So let me pull that up for you. All right. And when he says that actually is. So he says, my first job was that of secretary to General Rufus Ayres. So that was his first job. He was secretary at first. He wasn't the general manager of the coal mine. He was one of the leading lawyers and businessmen of the South who owned and operated many banks and coal mines. In less than 6 months after I went to work, I was transferred from the general's private office to the position of chief clerk of one of his coal mines in Richlands, Virginia. So this position of chief clerk is actually him being the chief clerk of the Seaboard Coal Company. Rufus Ayres' son, Harry, was the manager, and Napoleon Hill worked for Harry, Rufus Ayres' son, at the Seaboard Coal Company. All right. So he goes on to say, chief clerk of one of his coal mines in Richlands, Virginia, which was managed by his son, Harry. The other son, James, was the chief cashier of one of the general's banks. It's the Interstate Finance and Trust Company was the name of the bank. And that was also in Richlands. So he's getting ready to reveal to you when he actually took over as general manager as one of the coal mines. And then I'm going to show you a corresponding newspaper article that tells you what year that was. And then we're going to tie it all together by me showing you who he was married to in that year to reveal who the first wife was that he married when he was 15 or 16, 15 if you're going based off of the Lifetime of Riches, or 16 if you're going based off of Mastermind, the official memoirs of Napoleon Hill. So he says, shortly after I went to work in my new position of as chief clerk of the Seaboard Coal Company, a tragedy occurred which brought my first big opportunity to exercise my initiative and led to my appointment as general manager of one of the general's coal mines. So this tragedy that occurs happens before he's the general manager. And because of that tragedy and how he handled it and took initiative during that tragedy, he's appointed as general manager of the coal mine. So this is where he was in charge of 350 men, being the youngest manager of a mine in the country. The circumstances under which I procured such a responsible position at so youthful an age are mentioned because of their influence upon my life, and for whatever value they may be to others who are seeking the route to self-determination. So he was very young at the time. He was actually just turned 20. So he was 20 years old. And so he goes on to say, as much as I would like to omit this unfortunate circumstances because of the nature of the tragedy, I am compelled to mention the fact that both of General Ayres' sons came home from college with an overdeveloped habit of enjoying the good life, a habit which was destined to give me my first real chance at leadership. One weekend, both of General Ayres' sons went on a spree during which James accidentally dropped a revolver gun, which discharged and killed a bellboy. I heard of the accident almost immediately and went quickly to the hotel when it occurred, interviewed the only eyewitness to the tragedy, and took his statement in writing under oath, which gave James complete exoneration. I then called the coroner and procured a burial permit for the dead man, together with official recognition of the death as being accidental, and paid the expenses of his burial. So General Rufus Ayres' sons, Harry and James, were partying. They were intoxicated, as the details of the story are revealed in other documents. And while they were partying at this hotel called Ball's Hotel, James accidentally drops his gun, and the bullet discharges and kills a bellboy who happens to be black. And so this is where the controversy lies: is did this white man kill this black bellboy on purpose? Was it an accident? So Napoleon Hill, being one of the other workers for General Rufus Ayres, hears of the incident, all right, takes a statement from one of the eyewitnesses under oath, and then he calls the coroner. He procures a burial permit for the young man, and then he actually gets an official recognition that the death was an accident and pays the expenses for the burial. He goes on to say, meanwhile, he telegraphs General Ayres at his home at Big Stone Gap, Virginia, told him what happened, and informed him that he had gone to the general's Richland's bank and found it unlocked. So not only that, on top of the son accidentally killing somebody, he goes back to the bank where James was the manager of the uh, Interstate Finance and Trust Company, and finds it unlocked with all the vaults open and the money scattered around as if a cyclone had struck the bank. The General Rufus Ayres, immediately telegraphed him back and directed him to take charge of the bank, count the money, and charge to his account any shortage found. And a new cashier would be on hand Monday morning to open the doors and carry on in his son's place. All right. He goes on to tell about how he's in this conundrum of whether or not he wants to steal the money or not, because all the money is strewn about. He could have easily had, blamed it on, hey, the bank was left wide open, so somebody else took it. But he does the right thing and puts the money back. And after he counts it all, um, he finds that all the money is still there, and then reports all the money back to General Rufus Ayres. And so, going back to the story, he says, now back to my story. When General Ayres arrived Monday morning, the first thing he asked me was, how much was the shortage at the bank? How much were we missing in money from it being strewn about and the vaults being unlocked? When I told him once again that the cash balanced down to the penny, he looked at me incredulously and exclaimed, what? There was no shortage at all? I assured him there was not, but I have always believed he thought I had covered a shortage from my own funds as a means of shielding his son James, with whom I was very friendly. All right. Then, after the general had received my written report of the tragedy and had checked carefully the sworn statement I had taken from the only eyewitness to the shooting accident, he said something which not only gave me my first managerial position, but placed me on the better terms with my own conscience. He said, "You have handled this case as well as any experienced lawyer could have managed it. But you have done more than that. You have demonstrated traits of loyalty and initiative far beyond any I would have expected to find in one as youthful as you. On the theory that one good turn deserves another, I'm going to ask you to take over the coal mine as general manager. If you recover all the money and find no shortage in the bank that had been left unlocked for 2 days, I'm sure you will find no shortages at the mines. Therefore, you shall have complete charge of production and sales." All right. So it was because this incident to where General Rufus Ayers' son accidentally kills a black bellboy and how he handles that situation in taking the statement of a witness, getting a burial permit, confirming that it was an accident, paying for the burial, and then also going to the bank and reporting that all the money was still found, is that he's promoted to the general manager of one of General Ayers' coal mines. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen again and then show you the articles where it shows you the date that these things happen so you can see the dates of when he is married to this woman at 15 years old. So whether she's 26 and he's 16. So the first article I'm going to show you, you can just get it pulled up here, so bear with me. So you'll see this is dated. If you can see here, it's dated March 25th of 1904. So this is in 1904. This is March 25th. Mr. Owen Hill, which was his government name. Let me share my screen again. All right. So this is in March 25th, 1904. Mr. Owen Hill, so that's Napoleon Hill's government name, Oliver Napoleon Hill, promoted to chief clerk. The many friends of Mr. Oliver Napoleon Hill, who has for a long while been General Ayres' private secretary, will be glad to learn that he has been promoted to the position of chief clerk of the Seaboard Coal Company. So this is the company that he was promoted to chief clerk for when he references that in Mastermind. All right, with headquarters at Wishlands, Virginia, where the plant is located. Mr. Hill is son of Dr. James Monroe, or J.M. Hill, one of Wise County's most progressive citizens. Mr. Hill graduated at Tazewell College in 1901, and since that time has made a worthy record. It will be remembered that in last June, Mr. Hill was married to da 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 Miss Edith Whitman. All right. Now, Matt Novak addresses Mrs. Edith Whitman and calls him the second wife. But as you can see here, they're referencing her along the same time frame as the first wife, who he married when he was 15 years old. All right, but we'll find out how old he really was when he married Edith Whitman. So this is the wife that he was married to during the time that he is working or came to the attention of General Rufus Ayres, and also during the time that he's promoted as general manager as Rufus Ayres' coal mine. All right, so it calls Edith Whitman one of Tazewell's most highly accomplished young ladies, who is the daughter of Mr. W.O. Whitman, supposedly the angry father who made Napoleon Hill marry his daughter after impregnating her. And they call him a very progressive farmer of Tazewell, Virginia. Through the news, we express our most hearty congratulations to Mr. Hill. So this is March 25th of 1904. And now, if we go to another article, and this is the actual article. If I pull up this article here, if you can see my screen. So this is the article when he says a few months later, this tragedy occurs, and this is the result of him becoming promoted to general manager of Rufus Ayres' coal mine. And this is still when he's married to his first wife. So you'll see September of 1904. So whoever this first wife is, he's married to her in September 4th of 1904. And he's also married to her in March of 1904. So the first wife is still his wife during these incidences, because he says, while I was still married to my first wife, this tragedy occurred, which happened in September 1904. So it's the same person he's been married to. And then as a result of that, I get promoted to general manager of his coal mine. So accidentally killed Negro boy shot by James B. Ayers. All right. So a local paper publishes this morning an account of the accidental shooting at Richlands Wednesday night of a Negro boy by Mr. James B. Ayers, vice president of the Interstate Finance and Trust Company. The boy was employed at Ball's Hotel as porter and was in Mr. Ayers' room making up a bed. Ayers was unloading his pistol, so the report goes, and it was accidentally discharged, the ball taking effect in the Negro's stomach, from which he died in 25 minutes. All right. So this is the tragedy that Napoleon Hill refers to in September of 1904. All right. And so if I'll stop sharing my screen just for a moment, I will show you who he was married to at that time. Um, and it was Edith Whitman. So I can pull up I'll share my screen with you one more time here. And then show you the article when he actually marries Edith Whitman. All right. So it's just loading here. So I just wanted to show you this marriage just to further kind of show you the time frame here. So this is June 18th, 1903. And it says, on yesterday at 11 o'clock a.m., Mr. Oliver Napoleon Hill from Big Stone Gap, Virginia, was married to Mrs. Edith O. Whitman, daughter of Mr. W. O. Whitman. The marriage took place at the home of the bride's father, 1 mile east of town. Reverend R.A. Kelly, pastor of the Methodist Church at this place, officiated, and a large number of friends and relatives witnessed the ceremony. So, who was he married to in September of 1904? It was Edith Whitman. Now, according to Novak, Edith Whitman was the second wife, but the first wife, who he married at 15 years old, is mysterious. All right. However, you can see that Napoleon Hill addresses this first wife and says that I was married to her at 16. So we know it's the same wife that the Lifetime of Riches claims that he married when he was 15, because they're still within that young teenage time frame. Now, Napoleon Hill incorrectly states the ages, as does Lifetime of Riches, because when he married Edith Whitman, or his first wife, he was 19 years old. So he had just turned 19 on October 26, 1902. It was not yet October of 1903, so he was 19 at the time, not 16 and not 15. And then in addition to that, Edith Whitman, okay, she was not 26. She was not 10 years his senior of 16 years old. She was 23. So I don't know if he just did that for dramatic purposes, for readers to have some shock value of, oh, he was such a pimp and a player that he married somebody that was 10 years older than him. No, she was 4 years older than him. He was 19 and she was 23. So I'll stop sharing my screen. So I just kind of wanted to recap what episode 9 was. In episode 10, even though I restated a lot of the same facts, I just wanted to do that more fluently so that it was more clear. And then in episode 11, we're going to find out, through evidence and through verification, how many wives he had. All right. So we see now that it wasn't 5 wives. It wasn't who he married at 15, Edith Whitman, Florence Horner, Rosalie Beelan, and Annie Lou, Hill, who was his last wife before he passed away. We combine the actual first wife, who he married at 15, in Edith Whitman, so they're one and the same. So it actually ends up being 4 marriages and not 5. All right. Now, he goes on to say later on in the article, so I'll share my screen one more time and just go back to the Novak article, to where he claims that uh, Edith is, claiming that Napoleon Hill is abusive, and that he has thrown their baby on the ground and choked her. But you'll see here, the story picks up on March 23rd, 1905. A baby girl was born, Edith Whitman Hill, not Edith Whitman, the mom, but Edith Whitman Hill, the daughter. All right, named after her mother. By September of 1905, Napoleon, Edith, and their 6-month-old daughter moved to Marbury, Alabama, and lived there briefly until Hill sent his wife and child to live with Edith's father in Tazewell, Virginia. By June of 1907, Napoleon had moved himself to Mobile, Alabama, and was getting involved in the lumber business. The Creek Hill Lumber Company was incorporated in Alabama on June 28, 1907, but Napoleon had plenty of extracurricular activities. So here's where the claim starts. It turns out that throughout his marriage to Edith, Napoleon was visiting a number of prostitutes in cities throughout the South, or as his business associates would call them, women of ill fame. So here's a testimony of one of Napoleon Hill's associates, um, just recounting a time that they were sleeping with prostitutes. All right. So soon after we reached Bluefield, West Virginia, we went to a house of ill fame between 8 and 9 o'clock of that night. And Mr. Oliver N. Hill, within a few minutes after arriving there, took one of the girls to the room in the same house and stayed with her until about 12 o'clock that night. Both of the women who stayed at this house were of easy virtue, and Mr. Hill went there for the purpose of having sexual intercourse with these women. He admitted to me that night when we were going to the hotel that he had sexual intercourse with the girl that he took to the room. So here's an accusation in a statement from one of his associates of infidelity with Edith Whitman. So I feel like they're only throwing this in here to just further damage his character, because it really has nothing to do with whether he was a legitimate or a validated successful author, and whether he really knew Andrew Carnegie, and whether he really met other successful, wealthy people, and could validate those claims. So the two are unrelated, because you can be unfaithful to your wife and still be able to, you know, be telling the truth about you knowing Andrew Carnegie, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Thomas Edison, and the like, because that's really the main claim. But a lot of these articles will try to discount his character by making it seem like he has no values and no morals as well too. But the real claim is whether he was telling the truth about knowing Andrew Carnegie. It goes on to say Napoleon's and Edith's 5-year marriage was filled with turmoil and violent outbursts. At one point, Napoleon took their young daughter without telling his wife, leaving the baby with Hill's mother in Virginia and threatening never to return her. All right. In a letter dated January 24th, 1908, Napoleon wrote to his wife saying, I am leaving the country where you'll never bother me. You can only communicate with me through my father, and not unless he thinks best. Then by early April of 1908, just 3 months after writing this to his wife, Edith had gotten her baby back and filed for divorce, claiming that Napoleon was a man of violent and ungovernable temper, and that he treated both her and their child with disrespect and cruelty. So not only is there claims of infidelity, there's claims of domestic violence. So he goes on to say this cruelty included periods of violence when Napoleon would allegedly throw the toddler on the floor in bed and proceed to choke her. A child of maybe 2 to 3 years old, throw it on the floor and proceed to choke her. So these are her claims, and we'll find out why she's making these claims later. All right. And I'll actually reveal that there's no evidence that any of this is true outside of Edith just claiming this to be the case and why she may have claimed this to be the case. The elder Edith, the mom, was also alleged that she was constantly under the threat of violence, and that Napoleon had at least once threatened to kill her on a street in broad daylight, claiming he would blow her brains out. The testimony at the given divorce proceedings by Napoleon's former business associates and friends also outlined many incidents of infidelity with prostitutes. So we'll address these claims in episode 11 as far as Edith Whitman, now that we know that Edith Whitman is the first wife, who he supposedly married at 15 or 16, but he was actually 19. So I'll stop sharing my screen, and we'll pick up in episode 11 talking about Edith Whitman. You can find copies of the book in audiobook form on Audible. You can find it in ebook form on Kindle. And then there's 3 print versions. So there is the full 700-page version you can find on Amazon. There's the 4 volumes where the 700 pages are broken up into equal books. So you can bite the book off in small bites. Or you can actually get the abridged version and just read the story of Napoleon Hill, which is only 90 some pages or so, and read the full story. And then if you'd like to have the historical records as far as the newspaper articles proving and validating his claims, you can just get the companion guide separately from the abridged version, and have both the abridged version and the companion guide to have the newspaper articles there with you. But until episode 11, we'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.